Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the sources and give you the core insights fast. Today, we're heading to Arad, Romania. We're looking at a really tough stretch of history life after the Second World War, all the way through the communist period, ending in 1989.
Yeah, and our goal here is to really dig into the source material. It details the daily struggles, the political shifts, the shortages. It was grim. But maybe more importantly, we're looking at the flip side. How did people cope? How did community life, social life, somehow keep going, even thrive in some ways, against all that pressure?
We've got some really interesting stuff to work with. Accounts of rationing, yeah, but also these deep dives into how people spent their free time, the social scene, and sports, especially football and table tennis, surprisingly.
Right, and the core thing, the real tension throughout this whole period is that contrast.
Yeah.
You've got this constant political fear, real poverty, deep uncertainty about the future, and yet running right alongside it, this incredibly strong, almost basic human need to find some joy, some connection, some escape. We need to see how both existed at once.
Okay, let's start right after the war, 1945. Arad itself wasn't physically destroyed much, just one bombing raid mentioned, but the sources say the psychological impact, the trauma was just huge, immediate.
Absolutely. Suspicion became a major factor, almost instantly poisoning relationships. People gossiped constantly. Who did what during the war? Who ran off west? Who got captured? And the really corrosive stuff, who informed on whom? And this existing fear, this mistrust, it was just fuel for the fire, for the incoming communist propaganda machine, which slotted right into daily life very quickly.
So you got that psychological weight, and then the economy just falls apart. Poverty, uncertainty, that's the late 40s. And then boom, the 1946 drought hits hard. It wasn't just local problems. It apparently pushed refugees from the east into Arad, creating this massive housing shortage.
Yeah, real crisis. And the state solution was pretty drastic. It started dividing up the larger apartments, the ones owned by the old bourgeoisie in the city center. Imagine suddenly being told you have to share your kitchen, your bathroom with strangers, people who'd lost everything.
That sounds incredibly tense. Did the sources talk about that? The friction inside the homes?
Oh, yeah. It was a huge source of stress, of insecurity. The courses really highlight that, especially when the original owners realized these uninvited guests weren't leaving anytime soon. It was like the state physically taking over private space even before the big nationalizations kicked in fully.
Right. So chaos at home and then just getting basic necessities must have been a nightmare. We see rationing introduced, bread, cloth, shoes, all distributed through these state-run economat shops using ration cards.
It became a daily fight. Just think about winter. Getting firewood was this recurring ordeal. The sources describe people lining up from the night before at places like Podgorya Depot, hoping to get even a small, probably damp bundle. That constant grind, that struggle for basics, that was just life for everyone.
And things kept changing, kept getting more unstable. The big nationalizations hit in summer 48, private property basically wiped out. And then assimilation measures targeting minorities came fast.
Very targeted.
Yeah.
Culturally devastated. The Hungarian theater, right? 130 years old, just gone in 1948. Religious schools shut down quickly. And later, in 59, they merged schools specifically to assimilate the Hungarian kids. That caused a huge public backlash, apparently. Even though some good schools survived, like high school number 3, the state was hitting both economic and cultural foundations.
Okay, so we've painted a picture. Scarcity, fear, the state trying to enforce uniformity. So the big question is, where did people find any release, any psychological space to breathe?
Mostly they went outside to nature. It was the one thing the state couldn't really control or ration. It was cheap, it was accessible. People flocked to places like Sela Forest, the Three Islands area, the hills around Podgorya, continuing these old hiking traditions.
You see it in the sources, right? That weekly surge, the tram going out to Podgorya on Sundays, packed solid. And apparently the return trip was often lively. Lots of local wine involved.
Definitely. Giorak, Poli, mini wines, they fueled the good mood on the way back. It reads like this essential weekly release, letting off steam together.
And you mentioned the water culture earlier. Neptune Beach on the Murray River, that sounds like it was a big deal.
Oh, it was legendary. A cheap, easy vacation right there in the city, even in the worst years. People in other places were apparently quite envious, especially before the Black Sea resorts really developed. And rowing picked up again, too. Arad always saw itself as the heart of Romanian rowing, and the clubs revived, even hosting afternoon dances. Social life finding a way.
But maybe the most unique thing was this Corsul, the promenade. That Saturday and Sunday evening walk downtown between the Minorite Church And the Neumann Palace.
Yeah, the sources call it a melting pot. And it wasn't just a casual stroll. It seems it was almost a performance. People dressed up, put on their best, regardless of how poor they actually were. It was like holding onto a symbol of the city's old bourgeois character, a kind of quiet defiance.
So it wasn't just about seeing and being seen, it was information central, too.
Exactly. It was the main place to socialize, catch up on news, spread rumors, a really vital, informal information network. And it lasted quite a while, right up until Ceausescu's regime really clamped down later on.
Okay, so let's shift gears. How did the regime react to all this? They couldn't stop people needing community, needing escape. So how did they try to manage it?
Well, they tried to control it, co-opt it. Entertainment was state-approved, but it was cheap, so people went. Cinemas mostly showed Soviet war movies, predictable stuff.
Yeah.
But still, they were popular. There was one big exception mentioned. When the Hollywood star Javor Paul came back in 1946, the theaters were absolutely packed. Shows you the hunger for something different.
And radio, was that common?
Not initially. Radios were confiscated during the war, to stop people listening to enemy stations. So in the 50s, having one was a luxury. Later on, apparently being able to pick up dance music from Hungary's Kossuth radio, getting past the censors, that felt like a real treat, a gift.
Did the state try to provide its own culture?
Oh, yes. They pushed working-class culture through state centers, folk dance groups, lots of propaganda mixed in. But the real emotional release, the place society poured its energy, was sport. Especially football. The regime seems to have recognized football was a useful safety valve. Let people shout and release tension at the stadium where it was relatively contained.
And Arad already had a team ready to go, right? ITA, which became UTA, founded by Baron Neumann Ferenc just after the war?
Exactly. Neumann, back in '45, apparently still had some hope for the future politically, and he invested heavily. Built the best stadium around in under a year, famously flew the grass turf in from London.
Wow.
Yeah. That commitment set UTA up immediately.
And they were successful. 6 championships, couple of cups between 46 and 70, a huge source of local pride. But how did the state keep that contained? Stop the stadium buzz spilling into politics?
Well, there was a price for success. The sources mention that top players with Hungarian names had to have them officially Romanianized to get national recognition, to fit the narrative. It was a subtle but constant reminder. Even your heroes, even this collective joy, has to bend to the political line.
Interesting. So while that mass emotion was happening in the stadium, something else was starting television. Arad got test broadcasts from Budapest pretty early, 1957.
Yeah, and at first it seems it was quite social. People would cram into the homes of the few who owned a TV, watching the '60 Rome Olympics together, like 20 neighbors in one room. But the source actually makes a fascinating point, suggesting this was maybe the first major step towards the isolation we talk about so much today, gradually pulling people out of public spaces into their homes.
And that isolation eventually became state enforced, didn't it? By the late 80s, things got really tight.
Absolutely devastatingly so. Those restrictive measures, limits on petrol so you couldn't travel easily, frequent power cuts, plus that constant gnawing fear that the walls had ears. It just killed off social life. Group outings, the kind of stuff people relied on before, became almost impossible. Those escape routes were systematically blocked.
Yet, alongside the big football story, there was this other sport quietly achieving amazing things, table tennis, bringing Arad international recognition.
It's a great story, and it wasn't accidental. It was built on real dedication and infrastructure. The sport had roots there from way back 1903, but post-war, the key figure was Emil Prokopets Prokibaksi at the Voyna Sports Club.
An accountant who'd survived Stalingrad. He sounds like he knew how to get things done.
Exactly. He wasn't just a coach. He renovated a place called Crispin Hall into a proper facility, even built housing nearby for players they brought in. He was creating a system for excellence. And it worked. Especially the women players became internationally famous. Mihalka Eleonora moved there in 8th grade, ended up twice, world vice champion, European champion, incredible talent nurtured right there.
So this table tennis success, maybe less flashy than football, was running in parallel, also boosting the city's image abroad despite everything.
Yeah, it really underlines that resilience we keep seeing. Arad's people just kept finding ways to build community, to achieve something collectively, whether it was on the promenade, in the stadium, or, in a relatively small ping pong hall, resisting that pressure for uniformity and fear.
It really does capture their resourcefulness. Finding joy in nature, community on the street, pride in sport, all while dealing with poverty and that pervasive fear of denunciation.
And if you connect the dots, that strong, collective identity seen on the core soul, felt during shared traumas like the 1970 floods mentioned elsewhere, it was constantly pushing back against the state's efforts to homogenize and isolate. It was essential for coping.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. We've talked about these physical spaces, the beach, the stadium, the promenade acting as crucial pressure valves. So what happens when those valves get shut off? When the restrictions of the late 80s, the petrol cuts, the blackouts made those group outings almost impossible, as the source says, and TV pulled people indoors.
Did that final layer of isolation contribute to the intensity of what happened next? Romanian historians talk about December 1989 using the phrase, "Mamidiga exploded the moment the pot boiled over." If the state systematically dismantled the spaces for collective release, did that forced final isolation make the eventual explosion that much more potent? Something to think about.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.